All right, let's get this meeting started. Welcome back from summer break for some of us. Others have been working very hard as an example of all of the reports that we read over the last few days. So we're starting with 11 consent items, moved by Councillor Ioannidis. Councillor Gazzola, I'm assuming you want to take a couple out?
Yeah, I have questions on 7, 8, and 11.
7, 8, and 11. Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, I have some questions for 1, 2, 7, 8, and 11 actually too.
All right, so we need a motion or I guess it's been moved, a vote to take these out of consent. Those in favor? Those opposed? That's carried. All right, so we'll start with number 1, the appointments of the hearing officers.
So am I first?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I just wondered, and I think this is, let me just see. How many hours a week or a month are we talking for this position? Like, is it a full-time? Is it considered pretty well a full-time job, or are things consolidated into 1 day a week, or?
Try now.
Through the chair, we have scheduled 1 hearing date a month, so it'll be 1 day a month at this point.
Oh, okay. That was all. Thanks.
Okay, well, you might as well keep your mic on because your question is next for number 2.
Oh. Yeah, I just wondered if in the first part of the year, if there were any bylaw complaints registered with the Bingaman activities or events.
Through the chair, there have been a few events at Bingaman's. We have received 1 complaint for one of the music events, and the reggae night that they had a couple of weeks ago, we had 5 complaints.
And how would those 5 complaints have been mitigated?
So, through the chair, we did have a noise officer on duty as is required as part of their noise exemption. They did go out. Most of the complaints on the reggae night were in Breslau. That was the direction of the wind that evening. The officer did respond out and did take noise reads. They were within the 55 decibels that were permitted by council, so at no point did they exceed that.
Okay, so you're not concerned about moving forward in over the next month in the events that are programmed?
What I've been doing is tracking the complaints that are coming in, and I will certainly work with them. I've been raising it to them. So, for example, when we received complaints during the reggae night, I did connect with the promoter to let them know that there were complaints coming in. And I think moving forward for next year, if they bring that event back, we'll look at other ways that we can maybe mitigate the sound. But for the most part, we've really had no issues.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Councillor Marsh on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, just on number 2 as well. So with the Ever After Festival complaints, are those separate from the ones that you just were mentioning?
Through the chair, they are separate because we always bring that as a standalone report,
yeah.
So they would be separate.
Okay, and so with the other events that you mentioned that had complaints, were they on the same stage that's closer to the water and further from residential areas?
Through the chair, these events are all on that amphitheater stage that was created, so it's a little bit closer to the roadway than, for example, the Ever After stage is large and it's set into the bowl. So this one is the permanent stage that's there.
Okay. All right. So I guess I just want to clarify for one of the points in this recommendation. It says that the event organizers will agree to respond accordingly to requests from city staff in order to address community concerns. So that means adjusting the speakers or turning it down or what have you? Or like what specifically would they be asked to do?
So that's exactly correct. Generally what happens is if we are receiving a larger volume of complaints, such as the reggae night that they had, when I connect with them, they will try to make adjustments on their end. Even though they're still complying, they'll try to make adjustments on their end to turn down the bass or turn down the volume, whatever the issue is that's happening.
Okay, great. And so I would just ask that going forward, that as they expand their programming and have more partners that come in, if you can keep notes on which ones were more cooperative or not, and then so that it's easier for us to understand year after year what we can expect, and maybe if there are additional parameters we want to be putting on, or less, or whatever, Okay, thanks.
Okay.
On this one? Mayor Verbanovic?
Thanks. Just very, very quickly, because I think, as we look at this issue, and, obviously I had concerns with the EDM, and we've seen progress on that one with the speaker system that was brought in the past. But we also need to sort of keep these concerts in balance with some of the things that we do as well downtown. And so I'm wondering, do we get complaints about some of our downtown events as well?
Through the chair, off the top of my head, I wouldn't know the exact numbers. I know there is from time to time complaints with some of the bigger festivals such as blues. So essentially we do have to take that into consideration as well.
Yeah, so I think that's something that council needs to keep in mind as well, that, while we may want to sort of see certain enforcement levels, we need to keep in mind that those same rules will apply to us as well, and we need to balance that out with also a desire to create a positive environment in terms of these events and so on through the community that please a lot of our residents.
Okay, that appears to be all the questions on that one. So we will move to number 7 and start with Councillor Gazzola.
On the bottom of 7.1, it states that the province, there are no, what do they call them, PEZ in Kitchener. And yet now you talk about 2 areas in Ward 3 and Ward 5. Are they now considered PEZs or what?
Mr. Sloan?
Through the chair, the provincially significant employment zones. So in the first round, the province reviewed them for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. There are none that are wholly contained within Kitchener. What's in the report is recommending that those areas be considered in an upcoming meeting with the province, the region, and the city. We've been advised that the province in their first round of review have looked at upper and single tier comments, and they're now going through a review of lower tier requests related to this topic. And so this is at least to put it on the table.
Okay, that's what I thought I understood, that you're going to ask that they be designated in this fashion. What happens, has the region already dealt with those 2 areas?
Through the chair, I think we can sum this up that things with the province continue to be fast and furious. This emanated out of a phone call that the province had with a lot of the municipalities just 2 or 3 weeks ago. What they've indicated is that both the upper and lower tier municipalities must be at the meeting, must be planning and economic development. So we've had both city and region have a look at this report and to put this forward as a request. The region was going through a review starting right now. They were starting their region official plan review. They're looking at employment lands across all of the region of Waterloo and different levels of possible protection, or maybe there are some areas that could be considered for conversions. So we were just starting that process. However, the province is looking to finish their process of these new provincially significant employment zones very soon. So it's caught us kind of a little bit off guard that it's happening so quick and a little bit out of sync with where we're at with our regional review, but we don't want to be kind of left not being at the table at least. I do have a map with me if needed of the other areas that are indicated. So like in Waterloo, Guelph, Cambridge, and many other municipalities in Greater Golden Horseshoe have an area indicated. Usually it's their business park. It's a little odd that Kitchener's business park, Huron Business Park, and our industrial area was left out. But I believe that may be because it's not directly on a provincial highway, and I think that's one of the main criteria they started with.
Just a quick theoretical question with a quick answer. What if we didn't have any of these zones?
Through the chair, if we didn't have them, then there would be a greater risk of possible conversion to other land uses instead of industrial employment protection of the Huron Business Park. The way the province has amended the policies, it may make it feasible for someone to convert it to residential or something else.
Okay, I appreciate it. But my final question is, I'm concerned about where we're going down the road with Hidden Valley, especially with the secondary plan. Now, these areas come very close to that. Will this, where we're going, have any impact on where we're hoping to go as far as Hidden Valley is concerned?
Through the chair, it shouldn't. The Hidden Valley plan and the master plan that council endorsed in principle aligns with this approach and is built in the needed land use compatibility.
Thank you.
Mayor Verbenovich?
Thank you. A couple things, and I'm certainly glad that staff has suggested that our lands get included, because I think it is important from an economic development point of view. But a couple questions. Is there a reason why we're not looking at the Lancaster Business Park that sort of extends on to Binghamton Center Drive and over to Shirley? I mean, that's a fairly hefty area, sort of starting at Christie and working all the way along along that side of the highway.
Through the chair, we did review all of the industrial employment areas in the city. That one, I would suggest, is a close second. And I was thinking about that one again this morning. I did bring the map of all of our areas if we need to look at it. What we were thinking of is Lancaster Corporate Center. You got Shirley and Binghamton Center Drive, all the way down towards the edge of the city, and then even if you consider possibly across the river in the Bridgeport, has some business park lands as well. There was a little bit more reliance, like Lancaster Corporate Center is pretty focused on office space. That could be considered as part of this. There's also some lands further out in that area that may be more conducive to some other uses. We've seen some car sales established in the area. It's to council's purview if you would like to put on a second location for us to consider with the ministry. I don't think we would have a significant issue with that.
Would there be any drawbacks with adding it?
Through the chair, I guess it depends on what you would see as a drawback. At this point in time, it's really to have the conversation and have it considered. The next step would be the province, the region, and the city to fully review it and analyze it. And then if we would have to go back and there would have to be a letter of council support both at the upper and lower tier. So there is another check-in and another direction we could go. It really means the areas are really to be protected for those industrial or those business purposes. We think we may need a bit of flexibility in some of that area, but at the same time, it's pretty key to make sure that we have a good range of jobs in our municipality.
Well, and I guess that's really the key. Is it for just industrial purposes, or is it the broader, business park employment lands? Because employment of the future, as we know, is going to be very different. It's already been evolving. So, I think of the Lancaster lands, and quite frankly, the other one I think about is our innovation district. And we've already designated a chunk of lands that we own for that purpose. And no doubt as, you know, over the next multiple decades, some of the other businesses that are on both sides of those innovation lands will likely see transition as well, and, you know, should it be considered. And so, you know, I'm concerned that we remain competitive, you know, particularly if we, you know, continue to be a two-tier structure going forward. I think it's important for us in terms of job lands.
Yeah, through the chair, just the one item on the innovation district, that's the designation we have within the urban growth center. So urban growth centers aren't necessarily part of this consideration. A provincially significant employment zone, it has to be designated industrial or business park in your official plan.
Okay.
I guess if we do the comparison and looking at the Waterloo area that's north of Northfield, that would be the comparable. If we're looking at Lancaster Corporate Center and Shirley is comparable to that, and as we have indicated in the report, manufacturing is still one of the top employment sectors in the city. I think we'd be willing to include that one in the consideration. What we do need, and what was indicated by the province and in their materials, is there has to be council support for putting that forward, and then they'll consider it.
So, okay, and just my last question before I make a comment then about that is just this whole piece of work also impacts church, our ability to look at where churches go, from what I understand, and if anything, it actually will help us in the future for that. I mean, I know that's probably not what planning wants to hear, but it will give us some flexibility, because I know that that's been a challenge for us as a community.
Through the chair, essentially, the way this municipality went about a decade or more ago is we limited educational establishments and religious institutions within our business park lands to keep them for true kind of manufacturing, industrial office purposes. That's what essentially this would do at a higher level, is it would lock those down so that essentially they wouldn't be converted to religious institution, but lands that are not identified then may have that possibility subject to the region and city upcoming review. So I think about places like out on Glasgow Street by Highland, where there's a bit of a mishmash.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. Okay, which is encouraging to hear, because I know that's often a challenge that, you know, we've heard about at various times from non-Christian denominations that are increasingly prevalent in our community, looking for lands for places of faith and are struggling with that. Madam Chair, just when it comes to the recommendation, and I don't know if anybody said they'll move it, but at the time I would like to add the Lancaster lands, and based on the responses from Mr. Sloan, I think it's prudent for us to have them both considered, because there is merit on both of them, and quite frankly, it also may increase our odds of at least getting one of them covered off.
Okay, there's no further questions at this point on that one, so let's just deal with that one specifically. It's already been moved, and so I guess it would be an amendment to add that to the recommendation. So we'll vote on the amendment first, and that's to add the Lancaster Shirley area to the recommendation. All those in favor? That's carried. And then the recommendation as amended. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, now we move on to number 8. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, the recommendation for number 8 gives the authority to staff now to authorize these agreements. In the past, who has authorized the agreements?
Through the chair, I believe, so we've run this program previously, and I believe that it was the same recommendation. So to the best of my recollection, I was the ultimate signer of the agreement.
Okay, so that isn't changing?
No.
Okay. I just have a couple of questions on the thing. Why are the in-kind not integrated into the financial statements to give a truer picture of what the program really costs?
Through the chair, I can ask Chris Farrell. Unfortunately, is on vacation this week or this morning, so I can look into that and ask why those aren't accounted for.
No, that's fine. I just, it doesn't change anything, but it does, whatever's up in the revenue is also going to be reflected in the expenditures. It gives us a better picture. One of the reasons I ask is it seems to me that some of the other area municipalities might be getting off a little easier, and if everything were totally integrated, it would stand out even more. On that point, is the city of Waterloo getting a little bit of a free ride here?
Through the chair, on this program specifically, so on this program specifically is entirely paid for and funded by the region. What you're seeing is the financials for every time that Small Business Center brings one of these agreements, council's asked for the full financials to be attached for this business center. So if you're asking on, maybe to clarify, you're asking on the program or you're asking on the Small Business Center in general?
What are we approving today then?
Through the chair, today is simply to approve the partnership agreement between the region and the city to offer the Ontario Works program.
And what is the cost, or what portion of all of this relates to the Ontario Works program?
So through the chair, so that's the recommendations in front of you are specific to that program. So we receive $1,700 per participant, and that covers the Small Business Center's costs of providing that service.
So what's the total program? I mean, we're dealing with $1 million in excess. So what would the program, is it a very small part of the whole?
Through the chair, $60,000 cost a year, which is funded by the region.
All right, that's fine. I still would like, that's fine. I still would like to see, when we're dealing with the financial, if we could have everything integrated. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, just a question of clarification. So under the Ontario Works program, the way it's would be integrated with the business center, what happens with somebody who approaches a small business center, wants to mount a business? At what point are they cut off their Ontario Works funding?
So through the chair, the way the program works is it's actually one of the regional staff. They work with those on Ontario Works, and through that, so those caseworkers may identify, or people may identify to the caseworker that they're interested in starting their own business as opposed to going back to just being an employee. So that caseworker then refers that person to the Small Business Center to run through the program. I'm not sure what happens after they've sort of completed the work. Presumably, if they start a business, then they would come off Ontario Works. If not, then I'm not sure what the next step for them would be.
Yeah, because it'd be interesting to find out, right? Like, is it then left to the discretion of the Small Business Center to report back to the region to say, okay, this person has got a business started and therefore they're cut off, and if that's not the case, okay.
Through the chair, no, so the caseworker remains involved with each of the candidates. Our job is really to provide the business training and support.
Okay. Good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions for that one. And last, we'll move on to number 11. Councillor Grzula.
Yeah, on page 11.2, you show a graph, and you show how the head count is employee head count is decreasing. I'm just wondering if, and I don't need it now, and I'm sure you have these figures handy, but is it possible to get the actual figures of FTEs, the actual numbers for that period of time?
Ms. McGoldrick?
So through the chair, absolutely, we can provide those numbers as a follow-up email to council.
Okay, one other question along with it. Are there any disadvantages of going in this direction, of going from temporary to full-time? Does it not affect the city's flexibility in the future, and if things change.
So through the chair, so you'll see in the report, and I'm going to speak primarily to the 5 parks maintainers conversions, because that's primarily where we see a lot of flexibility within our organization in terms of the day-to-day operations. And with the number of the ratio right now in terms of FTE to temporary employees, I would say it's almost skewed to the point where we've become inflexible with our employment contracts and our ability of how we utilize temporary resources. So we're trying to shift that balance a little bit, slightly back to some additional full-time staff. Temporary employees and student employees do provide flexibility, and we always anticipate using them within our complement in terms of delivering services. Just currently, we have a significant amount of temporary resources that we would like to start to shift that balance.
Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea. I just had a question about when you refer to temporary positions, are they full-time temporary or not necessarily?
So through the chair, yes, that's correct. They're full-time temporary positions.
And how would the wage scale differ if somebody went from that full-time temporary position into a full-time position?
So in many cases, the wage scale are identical. In some cases, there's a minor shift in terms of temporary to full-time. However, what I can say about these positions is that they're all fully funded within the existing budget.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that appears to be all the questions. So we will, it's been moved by Councillor Ioannidis, and we've already dealt with number 7. So we're dealing with the rest of the consent items. Those in favor? Those opposed? That's carried. Okay, we're now going to move into the discussion items, and up first is the neighborhood speed limit review. And Farnak and Ivan are giving us a 5-minute presentation.
Good morning to the committee and the chamber. My name is Farnak Hosseini. My position here at the city is Transportation Planning Project Manager, and I'm overseeing the Neighborhood Speed Limit Review Project. I'm joined by Arian McCreeman-Jones, Manager of Transportation Services, Barry Cronkite, Director of Transportation Services, and Ivan Balaban, Traffic Technologist.
Farnak, before you start, can you move the mics a little bit closer to you so that, or lean in a little?
Okay,
We're just having a hard time hearing you. Thank you.
Thank you. In this presentation, today I'll provide an overview of the Neighborhood Speed Limit Review Project, followed by a summary of our findings, recommendations, and our proposed next steps. It's not working. Okay, thank you. Okay, in support of neighborhood safe streets, staff have initiated a study which reviews the possibility of reducing the posted speed limits from 50 to 40 kilometers per hour in Kitchener's residential neighborhoods. And for this purpose, we have reviewed the City of Kitchener's past experience with the streets posted at 40 kilometers per hour, the experience of other Canadian municipalities in lowering the speed limits, the potential benefits, challenges, and risks associated with this, city's speeding issues and complaints that we have received in the past, the City of Kitchener collision history, and the public engagement results. Our study results confirm the relationship between lower speeds and safer roadways, especially for vulnerable road users, and our public engagement results show that there is public support for reducing speed limits and speeding in Kitchener's neighborhoods. However, what is currently unknown is whether speed limit reduction on a neighborhood-wide scale can reduce the actual vehicle operating speeds. Our research into other municipalities shows shows that they are also in the early stages of a neighborhood-wide speed limit reduction, and as a result, a formal analysis on the effectiveness of this approach is not available yet. So as a result, staff recommends a pilot project to investigate impacts, challenges, and costs associated with a potential permanent and citywide implementation of lowering speed limits from 50 to 40 kilometers per hour in residential neighborhoods. And the objectives of this pilot are engage and educate the public on this approach, implement neighborhood-wide 40 kilometers per hour speed limits in 3 residential neighborhoods, collect and analyze data so we can understand the effectiveness of this approach and we can compare this to an individual street approach, get public feedback, especially from residents who live in the pilot areas, and prepare a report for council summarizing the results and recommendations. For implementation, we are planning to take a gateway signage approach. As you can see in the top right image, this is an approach similar to that the City of Ottawa has been taking. And in this one, the speed limit signs are posted only at the entry and exit points of a neighborhood, and therefore there won't be a need to add new signage to every single road within the area. And the bottom right picture shows a sample of this gateway sign. For selecting the pilot areas, we have developed a map which sections the city into potential neighborhood speed limit areas. These areas are mostly residential and they're bounded by city arterial roads and regional roads. And then based on a number of criteria, including concerns from residents, speeding data, school zones, and pedestrian destinations, we have proposed 3 pilot areas. The first pilot area is Zone 2 of the map and is located in Ward 5. The second pilot area is Zone 3B of the map and is located in Ward 4. And the third pilot area is Zone 64 of the map and is located in Ward 2. And regarding the school zones within these pilot areas, we are proposing to reduce their speed limit to 30 kilometers per hour from their current 40 kilometers per hour speed limit. And in terms of scheduling and next steps, we are currently in phase 1 of the project, which is expected to be completed by end of this summer. This phase includes project initiation, project planning, as well as securing required approvals to proceed. If approved by council, phase 2 of the project will begin upon approval and will include public engagement, education, manufacturing and installing new signs, and removing existing signage. Phase 3 will begin upon installation and will continue until fall of 2020 and will include monitoring, data collection, and public engagement. And phase 4 will begin in fall of 2020 and will include analysis of the collected data and feedback, evaluation of alternatives, and recommendations to council. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening, and we'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. There are a number of questions. So we will start with Councillor Marsh.
Oh, thank you. So I was wondering, oops, is that me? Thank you. Is that better? Okay. All right. So I think this is the right direction, and I'm excited to support this idea. I was wondering what would have been, what would be the impact of just not doing a pilot and doing a citywide initiative off the bat, since we know that it works in other communities.
Through the chair to the councillor, making this change at a city-wide scale does carry a significant cost of approximately $430,000. And that doesn't include a larger communication and education campaign that would need to be rolled out at a city-wide scale. Piloting the program, it gives us the opportunity to assess and collect data so we can put council in a better position to make an informed decision in a year's time. The pilot phase also gives residents, both internal to these neighborhoods as well as at a citywide scale, an opportunity to learn about why we're doing this, the benefits and the safety that it brings. It also gives us an opportunity to follow along with what Ottawa and Hamilton are doing. Ottawa is a little bit further along in the process than we are, and we're excited to see what data they collect, and they're getting to that phase now, and we've been in contact with them. And finally, there's approximately 1,300 signs that would need to be installed at a citywide scale. So regardless, we're going to have to phase this out over a number of years. So we're kind of taking advantage of the pilot and the first phase, so we can gain all that quantitative and qualitative data and bring all that back to council in a year's time.
Okay, and in Montreal, where they're doing the zero, what is it, Project Zero, I'm just curious, Project Zero initiative, are they reducing speed limits, do you know offhand, to 40 kilometers on arterial roads as well as on neighborhood roads? If you don't know, just maybe if we could find out. I'm curious, and then it'll be interesting to view from afar what their results are too.
So the detail, through the chair to the councillor, the details that we have right now is that they're reducing to 40 kilometer on main streets and 30 kilometers an hour on residential streets. That's what they're proposing. Yeah, correct.
So I don't know if Main Street is just a category that doesn't include, bigger streets or not. But maybe if we can just learn a little bit more, that I'd be interested.
Mr. Reedman would like to provide some input.
Through the chair, I just want to remind council that the province sets traffic rules, so the traffic legislation in Quebec is different than Ontario, so we're following guidelines that are established within Ontario, which restrict the application of reduced speeds on arterial roads.
Okay. All right then. And then one other question. When we partner with the Waterloo Regional Police Services to do enforcement in the pilot zone areas, I'm just curious if if they're going to be ticketing people who are above the actual new piloted speed limit, or because my understanding is that when they ticket speeders, it's usually when they are 10 kilometers or more over the posted speed limit, and so it would be difficult to see the results of enforcement if they're not actually enforcing the 40 kilometers. So it's not a statement. I guess I just want to know, do you know what they will be looking to enforce?
Through the chair to the councillor, we're working with the Waterloo Regional Police Service, and they're very much supportive of the approach that we're taking. Whether or not they're going to enhance enforcement or do some form of a blitz around these pilot areas is yet to be determined. But what we can say is that we want to test representative conditions. The objective is to test if reducing speeds at that neighborhood-wide scale, coupled with a strong communication and engagement plan, if that approach can have an impact on reducing speeds. We know that enhanced enforcement works, albeit speeds tend to return once drivers learn that police have moved on from an area. But if we temporarily heighten enforcement in the pilot area, then this ultimately becomes a test of how well enforcement works. Having said that, we could consider an enforcement blitz to help kick off the pilot, to help bring more awareness and education. But ultimately, I don't know that we would recommend keeping that in place over the course of the pilot. And finally, we can't commit to this on behalf of the police service, but it's certainly an idea that we can table with them.
For sure. And I'm not a proponent of taking a completely hard and fast approach. I mean, if you're 41 kilometers to get a ticket, I will be the first one to get that ticket. But I do think that if people were made aware of what speeds they're going, perhaps with more speed advisory boards in the areas, etc., then it's more about education and working towards changing habits than anything else. Thank you.
And with coming back from recess, I forgot how the procedure should go, and I forgot we have a delegation. So we're going to go to the delegation now. Melissa Bowman, sorry about that, Melissa. I have everyone still queued in, so we'll go from here. Welcome, and thanks for being here.
No problem. Good morning, Chair and Council. It seems like I'm here chatting with you quite frequently these days. I was reflecting on why that was, and I think it's because many of these issues are so closely tied to each other. Snow clearing, bike lanes, strong neighborhoods, and now reduced speed limits. Each issue connects strongly to each other and helps create accessible, equitable neighborhoods, something that I'm very passionate about. And on that note, just a quick shout out to Council and staff in getting the bike lane pilot up and running on Queen. It's looking great and well used already. But back to today's issue on the speed limit pilot. As in many of my other presentations to Council, I applaud Council for being on the right track with this one. But again, I'm going to encourage you to be a little bolder and go even further with the recommendations. The majority of respondents identified safer streets as a main priority in a number of recent engagements and surveys of residents. I know that traffic concerns were the most common topic residents wanted to speak with me about during last year's municipal election campaign. I'm sure many of you heard similar comments last year while campaigning. And I can assure you, not a single one of those residents was asking for faster or wider streets. So I was thrilled to see this staff report come forward with the recommendations to lower speed limits. Now let's take a closer look at that staff report. It outlines both benefits and challenges to running a pilot. Potential benefits include a decreased risk of collisions, which makes sense as people going slower have more time to react to their environment, plus require shorter stopping distances. Another benefit is increased rate of survival, and by no small margin either. Moving from 50 to 40 kilometers per hour moves the survival rate from only 15% up to 75%. For cyclists and pedestrians, this point alone makes this project a worthwhile endeavor. And to my earlier point about encouraging you to be even bolder in your plan, survival rates go all the way to 90% at 30 kilometers per hour, making that something worthwhile, worth considering perhaps. Other advantages include increased health benefits and more human interactions. As a supporter of strong neighborhoods, I see that both of these are much needed in our communities. Of course, we also need to consider possible negatives of this project. The staff report identifies potential challenges as non-compliance, a false sense of security, public confusion, and services schedule adjustments. I see numerous ways that we could mitigate many of these, including education and enforcement in the short term and street redesign as we move forward. When I compare those two lists of potential benefits and challenges, it seems overwhelmingly clear to me that the benefits far outweigh potential challenges. We are comparing a strong improvement in survival rates and health benefits to challenges around enforcement and education. Reducing speed limits also fits in well with a number of the city's main priorities. Earlier this year, Council declared a climate emergency and also set out both a corporate and citizen climate plan. In order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we need a city that encourages more people to walk and cycle more often. Lower speeds help people feel comfortable to do exactly that. The strategic plan also commits to people-friendly transportation, which reduced speed limits also contributes to. And we'll soon have a complete streets plan, which encourages the creations of streets that are welcoming to all citizens. Again, slower streets can be a key component of that. So I clearly urge you to vote in favor of this plan, but I also want to encourage you to go even further. I would love for people to look at Kitchener as an example of what's possible when we take seriously the safety and importance of active transportation. I urge you to consider not making this a pilot project and instead go ahead and make this happen city-wide starting this fall. If staff believe compliance will improve by reducing speed limits in entire neighborhoods as opposed to single road segments here and there, I would suspect we could see greater results if we had consistent reduced rates throughout the entire city. While I'm at it, I'll also put in a plug for reducing the speed limits to 30 kilometers per hour. We have other cities to look to as examples of implementing reduced speeds, such as Hamilton, which has installed 40 km/h signs on over 250 streets since 2015, and in July of this year approved a plan to implement that across the city. Calgary, Montreal, and Ottawa are implementing similar initiatives. With all that in mind, I ask that you not only accept this plan, but improve it by removing the pilot aspect and make it citywide starting this fall. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. That was a great presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Melissa? If you do, put up your hand. Nope. Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, back to the queue then. Next was Mayor Verbanovich.
Thank you very much, and thanks to staff for bringing this report forward, because it is something that I know in talking with many of you on council was a big issue at doorsteps during the election, and certainly was one that I heard as well. A few questions in terms of the data collection piece. I presume there's going to be some data collection done on these streets prior to the new signs going in, and then sort of at a couple points throughout, and then at the end. Is that the plan?
Through the chair to the mayor, that's correct. The before-after data comparison will be critical to understand how well this approach works. We have a lot of current data for the speeds on individual streets in the areas that we've identified, and we'll be collecting after data likely in the spring after there's been a chance for behavior adjustment, and also give the community a chance to absorb all of our education and communication materials that we'll be rolling out. But the before-after will be critical, and I'll also mention the qualitative. So our plan is to roll out door-to-door surveys for everyone within the pilot areas, as well as online surveys for the city more broadly to understand how residents are perceiving and accepting the change.
Okay, that's good to hear. Just further on the question that Councillor Marsh was asking around our police partners, and we've all, heard or understood, maybe even been given a break ourselves around that 10 to 15 mark that's typically used from an enforcement point of view. But notwithstanding that, even if that did exist, it would still benefit us, I presume, because instead of the threshold perhaps being 66 kilometers, it would now be 56 if 15 was the threshold, which would slow things down, and quite frankly more likely to catch a few people and send a message. Is that not the case?
Through the chair to the mayor, I agree. It does set the threshold lower. Having said that, police now have or would have the ability to enforce at 40K.
Right.
So it'd be to their discretion, I assume, based on driver history and how they're driving and the circumstances of the case at hand. But correct, the benchmark would be lower.
Okay. You make the point around the benefit of broader habit changes, and I think that is true. So, I don't think we can expect the same kind of result from a pilot like this as we would from a citywide implementation, because instead of teaching people that the speed limit is 40 except when signed otherwise, the speed limit generally in the city is still 50 unless signed otherwise. And so I think that broader kind of change is going to be necessary. Is there a way that you're going to kind of factor in for that as we look at the results a year from now and make the determination if we should go broader?
Through the chair to the councillor, understanding how speed limits change is going to be critical. I mentioned the before-after data that we'll compare. The communication and education campaign internal to these neighborhoods is going to be critical to hopefully changing driver culture. Simply rolling it out citywide without coupling it with a very strong education and communication campaign, I think that would probably set us up for failure. That's why starting with these 3 pilot areas gives us a project scope and size that's much more manageable. It allows us more contact points with the people that live in this neighborhood to really understand what we can do in terms of driving driver behavior change.
I guess one of the things I would also encourage staff to do as part of that outreach is look to how do we work with the driver education schools in terms of the education piece, because quite frankly, this is a habit change that needs to start when you get your license at 16, and it's going to be hard to change a 60 or 70-year-old. I mean, it will happen, but it's going to be much harder when they've been used to driving a certain way for the past 30 plus years. So I'd encourage you to do that. Okay. Has anybody said they're going to move this yet? So at the time, I'd like to move this, please.
Okay, thank you. Up next is Mayor Johnston. Sorry, Councillor Johnston. I was reading Margaret, Mayor. I have summer brain.
Well, it is
clearly.
It feels like a new year, so thank you. Yeah.
Promotion for you.
It feels great. Thank you. Thank you, staff, so much for this report. I am very much in favor of moving forward on changing the speed limits. It's certainly something that I talked about when we were campaigning last year, and certainly is something that it definitely, traffic is the number one issue that I'm contacted by residents about. So definitely in favor of that. And thank you, Ms. Bowman, for your presentation. That was great. You stole my thunder. But no, that's really wonderful. So I did have a few questions for staff, and I was wondering about what is happening with conversations with the City of Waterloo around this. I know that during the election, people running there had talked about this as well, and there seemed at the time like a real willingness, and I believe conversations had happened around doing something with them to have a combined project around this.
Through the chair, we've worked very closely on this one. It is a joint service initiative between the City of Kitchener and the City of Waterloo, so we've worked really closely with our counterparts in Waterloo. They're rolling this into their transportation master plan, which they're currently undertaking. So any recommendations related to 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limits or reduced speed limits will be reflected in their master plan, which will go to the City of Waterloo Committee and Council in early 2020.
Okay. One of the things that you pointed out in your staff report was a concern around public confusion for motorists by having one area have the pilot project and other areas not. And I realize that there's a cost in terms of the signage. So I was thinking that if we wanted to do this citywide, perhaps to save money, if we have a public education campaign, is going to be extremely important, but could we save money on signage by making sure that all of our incoming signs to our city say this is a community that residential streets are 40 kilometers, school zones are 30, and that's well publicized everywhere instead of having to have the individual signs that would make it more expensive?
Go ahead.
Through the chair to the councillor, the short answer to that is no. And the reason is because there's a couple. The scope here doesn't include arterial roads, and it also doesn't include regional roads. If we were to sign all the gateway exit points around the city, it would then therefore have to include those roads. Secondly, the HTA, the Highway Traffic Act, it allows us to, as per Bill 65, the Safe School Zone Act that was passed in 2017 and the HTA updated in 2018, it allows us to designate areas, neighborhood areas, and then sign the gateway exit points to those areas, which are the neighborhood areas that are identified in the map in one of the schedules. So we can't, at this point, do citywide. We need to do individual neighborhoods in order to focus on the neighborhoods.
I was trying to help you be creative. Okay, so my last question then would be around the school zones. I find that in the school zones we tend to have 40-kilometer signs in front of the schools. That doesn't seem to be necessarily the issue where the traffic is, because no one can pull into a school parking lot to drop kids off. The residential streets around the schools tend to be the places where the majority of the parking is and where the majority of the traffic problems are, but there's not signage there. What can we do to help with that?
Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair, in terms of school zones, we have challenges in nearly every school zone in the city with parking and an abundance of traffic during pickup and drop-off time. In those windows of time, there really isn't a speeding concern. There's so much traffic and so much volume in and around the schools that traffic is forced to move very slowly. So recommending 30 kilometers an hour in front of these schools is a recognition that schools aren't just a 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. operation, but rather that they're an area where you would expect to see a higher rate of children outside of those windows as well. They become a community resource, and so that's why we're targeting 30 kilometers an hour in those school zones. In terms of the issue that you're having, I think it's a different conversation in terms of how we address parking and how we address that volume around the schools, but it's not something that can be addressed through a reduction in speed limit.
Thank you. We'll chat later.
Up next is Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I was able to hear both perspectives of, obviously from staff side, of wanting to go with the pilot project, as some members of the committee have encouraged going citywide along with the delegation. I think this is a good approach. I think we do have to have that quantitative and qualitative data to see exactly how it's fitting. So one thing that gives me pause a little bit, although I think, in any aspect that we could try to bring greater safety to our roads and for pedestrians is a good idea. But where I have a question is, far too often where we have concerns in our neighborhoods with speeding or intersections, and there are requests for stop signs. And this conversation I've had with transportation staff far too often saying, let's put a stop sign there. And the answer typically tends to be, well, stop signs don't always work because people don't follow signs. So I hear you, this is going to be a long-term project to really change behavior, and it doesn't happen overnight. But why would this work and the stop signs aren't working? Again, someone going through a stop sign is a violation. As someone speeding over 40 kilometers an hour will be a violation. So it's not just about the law, it's just people don't follow signs.
Through the chair to the councillor, we don't know that this is going to work absolutely. What we're trying to do is tap into driver culture through education and communication to demonstrate the safety benefits of driving at a slower speed. Totally agree, the stop sign conversation happens time and again, and we've developed some consistent messaging around that. The Ontario Traffic Manual actually clearly states that you cannot use all-way stops as a traffic calming method. That's not their intended use. The intended use is to alternate two-way traffic at an intersection. And the more that we relay that message and tie it back to the Ontario Traffic Manual to residents who are requesting all-way stops, the easier it is to bring them around so they can understand. But that isn't a traffic calming measure. The 40 kilometer is just one tool that we have in a toolkit, including our formal traffic calming, seasonal, and resident-led. And we hope the combination of all these things with the education campaign will have some added benefit. But to your point, the quantitative and qualitative data is going to be critical to understand if this approach actually works or not.
And that's why I think it does need to be drawn out so that we can really educate the public. I think that's probably the biggest component, not just putting up signs and saying these are the new rules, but really bringing that public discourse and dialogue and saying why is this necessary, why we're doing it, and what the new rules would be. So I just pulled up an article that Kitchener Today. There's a picture of a median sign that says 40 kilometers an hour. Is that going to be a new way of showing what the speed limit is in the pilot project, or it'll be boulevard signs typical to the normal speed limit signs that we have?
Through the chair to the councillor, are you referring to the in-road flex sign that we use?
Yeah.
So we're right now working on a standard operating procedure for our seasonal program. We've been working with councillors for 2 years now. We have a lot of lessons learned about rolling out the locations for the flex signs, both in terms of where we put them and getting them installed and working with operations staff. So that is a separate initiative.
No, I know it's a separate initiative. My question was for the speed limit, indicating what the speed limit is. Would we use those to indicate it as opposed to just the typical boulevard sign? Because this is something different. People are very used to inside streets being 50 kilometers an hour. No one really looks out to see what the speed limit is in that area. And this would give a very directional indication what the limit is.
Through the chair to the councillor, thank you for clarifying. The yellow flex signs, those aren't regulatory, those are warning signs. So whenever you see a yellow sign, it can't be enforced, it's just a warning. The new signs that we would be installing through this initiative would be regulatory and could be enforced. Would we couple the seasonal program with these pilot areas? It's certainly a possibility, and we can work with councillors on that.
I think those two can work well in conjunction. My time's almost up.
Mr. Meadman wanted to add something.
So I don't want to eat into Councillor Singh's time, but I do want to be crystal clear that the other studies the other implementation that's been done, there is no data on whether it's effective or not. That's why we were recommending a pilot to council, to make sure that it is effective, because staff do have concerns that signs alone don't work, to Councillor Singh's point. But in consultation with the communication engagement, as well as perhaps some enhanced enforcement in one of the 3 zones to see if that does make a difference, would be an effective rollout of the program, in our opinion.
Thank you. I'll just leave this as a final question to staff, and then I'll key out. You already mentioned that there's some dialogue that's happened with the City of Waterloo. The data that we collect over this year, would we be sharing that with them, helping them to come to hopefully the same conclusion if they're moving forward with a citywide?
Through the chair to the councillor, absolutely. Not only Waterloo, but Hamilton, Ottawa, Montreal, we're extremely excited to hear what results they're having with the programs they're rolling out.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. First, I had a couple questions. So how is effective measured?
Through the chair to the councillor, just to clarify, how will we determine if, in fact, this change is positive?
Yeah, sorry.
It'll be mostly driven by the quantitative data, comparing the before speeds to the after speeds, and we'll likely collect that data in spring of 2020 after the community's had a chance to adjust driver behavior.
So if the outcome was to show that it was ineffective, then what?
Well, that'll be part of our evaluation. The qualitative data will also be critical, and the perceived benefits that this brings to the community. I think we also have to tie this to our complete streets strategy, and that gets to the geometric design and the cross-section design of our roadways. Our ultimate goal is to design roads that have a design speed of 40 kilometers an hour. So this pilot reflects that approach versus previous designs that were more geared towards 50 kilometer, 60 kilometer design speeds. Okay.
I want to just turn to 12.5 for a moment with the collision history that's on here. Is it possible for staff to prepare for the council meeting data on where these collisions occurred, what time of the year, whether winter, summer, were they in 50 kilometer hour zones, 30 kilometer an hour zones, 40 kilometer an hour zones, so that we can get a sense of how this would tie into to the whole pilot project that you're proposing. I mean, did you want to respond to that?
Through the chair, we're talking about 6,000 collisions over a 5-year span. So there's quite a bit of work in terms of analyzing those collisions and pulling them out specifically street by street and being able to present that to council. That's a tall order. I'm not sure that staff would be able to complete that volume of work in that 2-week window.
Could it be done by the season?
We can generate a comprehensive collision report by the end of the fall.
Okay, so I'm more inclined to want to support a citywide pilot project, or not pilot project. I don't think we need a pilot project. I think if we look at the information that's coming from other cities and from concerns probably even beyond our Canadian borders, which I don't have that data, but if you have any insight into that, it'd be most welcome. But I think, pilot projects are fine, but if we know we've got a problem, and why, I'm not quite sure why we're resisting moving forward on this. The signs that you're proposing to put in these 3 zones that have been identified are signs that if in the end data showed that yes, reducing speed would be the route to go, those signs are useless, really, because they're very specific to those areas. Whereas if, I go back to the question of could we not just, a lot of roads don't say they're 50 kilometers an hour, so it's not that every road in the city would have to say it's 40 kilometers an hour. You could have them in strategic areas, maybe where there is a bigger problem with speeding and roads that have been identified. And so to say you need 1,300 signs, is that to replace every existing sign in the city right now, or what signs are we actually talking about?
Mr. Reedman would like to add something.
Through the chair, so I would like clarification on the purpose of the collision report, and if that is the case, I would ask for council to pass a motion, because that would take staff off of work that they're doing through a suite of transportation to report back on collisions across the city. What I can commit to is through our reporting back to council is we would look at collisions in those pilot neighborhoods versus the previous 5 years, to do a comparison to see how the speed limit change has affected those, rather than a citywide collision report.
So do I speak? Okay, so the reason because I look at this data and it doesn't really mean a lot to me in connection to what's being proposed here as a pilot project. It's very large numbers for 5 years in the whole city, yet we're talking about a pilot project in very confined areas. So I'm not quite sure how to make the connections. I don't know if these are summer accidents, winter accidents, if they're in the zones that we're actually talking about. I guess that's my difficulty, making the connection to the data that we're being provided with and the justification for looking at those zones.
Through the chair, so what I could suggest is perhaps transportation staff could sit down with Councillor Chapman and go over the metrics that were chosen to evaluate the recommended pilot locations, to talk about collisions, because we do have data. It is also open data, so that is available from our website for anybody to download collisions and anything that's not personal information.
Barry, you wanted to add something?
Through the chair, yes, it's not regarding the collision statistics, but rather regarding the signage itself. So because arterial roadways will remain at 50 kilometers an hour, we have to install the gateway signs that were presented. So if we were to sign these 3 neighborhoods, these signs, and we were to roll this out citywide, those are the exact same signs that we would have to do neighborhood by neighborhood. And so that's why we get to the overall cost and number of signs that are required for this type of program. In no way would these signs be throwaway signs if they were to be installed in these 3 pilot areas.
Okay, Councillor Chapman, your time's up, but you can cue back in. Councillor Michaud?
Thank you. I don't think it's any surprise to staff that I am thrilled this is happening. This is really good news. However, I too would like to see, I agree with Councillor Marsh, I would like to see this go full on instead of these pilot projects. Patience, not my virtue, it's not my strong point. But anyways, the increased survival rate on page 12.3, it just states that 50 kilometers in a pedestrian, the likelihood of survival is 15%, and it increases to 75% at 40 kilometers. So that in itself should tell us that this is like it doesn't matter how many pedestrian accidents, car accidents are happening, every person counts. So I think that this itself speaks volumes of why we should just really push forward on this. And the next question I have is, you said the cost was $430,000, I think, is what you, right? So you put, what is the whole pilot project, is it, how much would the whole pilot project over the course of the next 2 years cost? Is it probably in there? Or just guess, that's good.
Through the chair to the councillor, the total cost of the pilot would be $20,900 plus an additional $15,000 for the engagement and communication work that we want to do.
Okay.
15, correct,
right.
Yeah.
So when we're finished the pilot project, it's still going to cost $400,000 to put it through, right? It's not like we're still going to have to, if this pilot project works, which I think it's going to, we're still going to have to pay the come up with $430,000 to cover it citywide, correct?
Through the chair to the councillor, if council decides to go in that direction after a year of analysis and evaluation, correct, that's the estimated budget.
Okay, and I'm glad to see that there's a little bit of collaboration with Waterloo. I think I think Barry and I have had this conversation in the past. In order to make something like this, viable and to work right across, it makes it consistent because our communities are so close together. I mean, you're going from Kitchener to Waterloo on one street. When it goes, it's going to have to go all through the region. So is there any collaboration going to start with the region early on with this? Have they been approached or anything?
Through the chair to the councillor, just to confirm your question, work with the region of Waterloo or city of Waterloo?
Well, the city of Waterloo, I know, is doing their master plan study, and it's going to kind of tie in with what the findings come from this project, correct? So now I'm wondering, has there been any conversations with the regional municipality of Waterloo? The whole region? Mm-hmm.
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, we meet quarterly with our municipal counterparts and the region to discuss traffic issues. That table or that group is aware of what we're doing here, and they're interested in our findings. The region, at this point, hasn't indicated that they're going to move in this direction because regional roads serve a different purpose. But there is collaboration happening with our municipal counterparts.
Okay. And one last question. Just on this list here on page 1210, it says the Homer Watson Boulevard is a regional road, correct? Like the whole, from Conestoga College all the way to Sterling. It's all regional. And I see that on Homer Watson, from Sterling South to Ottawa Street, it's only 60 kilometers. And it's higher than that from Conestoga to Ottawa, right? I think it's about 70, which means they go 80 or 90. And we can take this offline. I was just curious. I don't want to take up any time. We can talk about that later. So anyways, I would like to see this go full on and just skip the pilot project and do this, because this has been something that's, I think, a lot of the communities in this city and probably in the region that are concerned, especially at the rate that this region is growing. Thanks.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you answered this already when Councillor Chapman was asking it, but I'm going to ask it again because I think it's important, is how do we know, how are you going to assess if what we're doing in the pilot is a success? We need to know right up front what the parameters are. So, can you give me a 30-second?
Through the chair to the councillor, it's the speed data, the before-after speed data comparison.
Okay, that's it. So it's all on the speed. So are we going to say that if the speed goes down by 10%, is that a success? If the speed goes down, where do we draw the line? If the speed only changes by 5%, is that a success?
Through you, Madam Chair, so there's two types of speed that we'll be evaluating, and one that I think all of council will have heard us talk about at some point is the 85th percentile speed, and that's the speed at which 85% of vehicles are driving at or less than. There's also another calculation that's lesser used, but it's called the operating speed, the average operating speed. So when you're looking at a program like the neighborhood speed limit review and the reduction of from 50 to 40K, that speed becomes just as important, because what we want to do is we want to know on average if we were able to reduce the speed at which vehicles drive. To say that the program would be successful if there was a 5% reduction or a 10% reduction, we really can't necessarily say that at this point. I think that any overall reduction in average operating speed will be seen as a positive. There's also the qualitative information here that I think will be just as important. And if we can change the perception in our neighborhoods to make people feel safer, then that translates to driver behavior, and then you start to create a different culture. So the perception will be just as important as the actual quantitative data itself.
All right, you've used a lot of my time, but I hope this is clearly identified as to how we're going to measure going forward before we make a lot of different changes. I would wanted, as I looked at your statistics, I also found them that they weren't very meaningful. I would like to know, at least with the 7 fatalities that we had, if we could get a little more information before the council meeting. What were the accidents? What caused the accidents? Were they to do with speeding? Were they to do with something else? Something that we need to know. Is that possible, just on the 7?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would suggest that that's likely not possible. When we get the collision statistics from the police, that type of information in terms of exact cause is generally not known. So we're getting a copy of the initial police report that's created. Their investigation, especially in a fatality, continues well beyond us receiving a copy of that collision.
Okay, but if it had nothing to do with speeding, then we need to know that. Because the whole issue here is speed. That's what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with other errors that drivers make. So it is important to know whether that was speeding that was involved in, and that really goes beyond to all of the detail of all of the accidents. What portion of that has to do with speeding? Are there other things? So my time is quickly running out here. I'd like to know on page 12.6, these incidences were what you used to pick out the areas that you're going to look at. Is there any explanation for going from 2 incidences in one ward to 19 in another? How do you explain that?
Through the chair to the councillor, logging complaints isn't an exact science, and we are working to be more sophisticated in that regard. We started formally logging all traffic complaints in early 2017, and we're continuing to improve. We can only log what we hear. For example, if a resident contacts their local ward councillor with a series of traffic complaints, parking, speeding, enforcement, congestion, but they only relay to us a parking concern, complaints can be missed. But we are trying to improve that process. So it's tough to justify or explain why one ward gets less than another.
All right, I was just getting a little parochial because you went from 2, 4 to 5, and you forgot 3. I wondered what was wrong with 3. But I have one more question that I'd like to ask you, and it really deals with the form of the road. All of these things go back to what the streets that are planned, how the streets are laid out. What are we doing in that area? What are we doing as we approve new developments, all of these things? That's where the problems really start. Now, have we done anything, or are we planning to do anything in those areas?
Mr. Reedman?
Through the chair, so you may recall about 2 years ago, council approved traffic calming program for new subdivisions, as well as the development manual is currently being updated by engineering staff to reflect the geometric design guidelines that are approved through that staff report, as well as contemporary practice.
So are we going to be enforcing some changes in these big, long streets that we're approving?
Through the chair, so you already have done that a couple of years ago. One of the issues is that subdivisions are approved about 7 years in advance of construction, so some of what you're seeing is still carryovers from previously approved work, but through newly approved subdivisions, yes, this is being designed right in.
Okay, going forward, thank you.
Councillor Davey?
Thank you. Just very quickly, I do appreciate the work on this. It's looking good. But I have some concerns and questions as well. You mentioned the 85th percentile and the average operating speed. I think probably the average operating speed is more valuable to me. Do you know what the average operating speed is on 50-kilometer roads in the city right now?
Through the chair to the councillor, we don't rank streets or wards for that matter when it comes to speed. Ward boundaries generally aren't required for analysis, nor are street by street.
No, sorry, not street by street or ward specific throughout the city. If a speed limit is 50 kilometers an hour, what's the approximate speed that the average vehicle is traveling at?
Through you, Madam Chair, because we don't have data on every single street in the city, it's really difficult to say that the average operating speed in the city would be X. That said, when we do our 85th percentile, when we do traffic calming meetings as an example, we roll out that 85th percentile, the average operating speed is usually about 5% less than that. So I would, based on my educated opinion, or my technical opinion, I would expect that it's slightly above 50 kilometers an hour if we were to look at most of the roadways that we've collected data on over the past 3 to 5 years.
So, sorry, you're saying in your opinion, I appreciate it because it's obviously far better than our understanding, but the average speed on a 50-kilometer road is only slightly above 50 kilometers per hour presently? I find that interesting.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes. As you can appreciate, using the traffic calming program as an example, we have 170 plus streets that have been requested for traffic calming. To qualify for traffic calming, it must have an 85th percentile of 55 kilometers an hour or greater. So of those 170, 30 roughly would qualify. And so that gives you an idea and a sense of where that 85th and where that average operating speed falls. It falls below that 55 kilometer an hour mark.
Okay, thank you. Anecdotally, is staff aware of police enforcement for speeding in general? Like, anecdotally to me, it seems like it's definitely reduced over the years. I see fewer and fewer speed traps. Is staff aware of that at all?
Through the chair to the councillor, we don't have that information, but we can request from the police service.
Okay. On the 30 kilometer an hour limit in school zones and that sort of thing, just to sort of educate myself a little bit, I tried driving around at 30 kilometers an hour since this report came out, and it is very, very slow. It's difficult to comprehend people traveling at that speed at all. In fact, I think people can run faster than that in many cases. So is that a realistic goal? And I do actually wonder, like, I know it's only for school zones, but is the doubling of the fines in school zones not as enough of a disincentive to keep speeds lower there?
Through you, Madam Chair. So whether we double the fines or not in a school zone, if we don't have enforcement, again, it's completely ineffective. To be frank, when we put this report together, this 30 kilometer an hour piece is one of the things that I was the most excited about, because I feel that it has the greatest potential in the school zones to change behavior. Again, as you've alluded to, You're conscious about your speed when you're trying to drive at 30 kilometers an hour, and it makes you think about the speed that you're driving at. Generally speaking, the way that we drive is based on our subconscious behavior. It's something that we do over and over and over again. So the 30 kilometer an hour speed in particular is going to make you think about what you're doing, and it's going to make you make drivers make a conscious decision at what speed they're driving, as opposed to that autopilot that we generally see.
Okay, thank you, sir. Madam Chair, two more questions, hopefully quick. Looking at the review of other municipalities, I was trying to get an idea whether this works or not. The only one that actually published something was Edmonton in terms of a reduction, and it was 9 years ago. It was only on 6 roads, and they only showed a 7% reduction. Actually, that's significant, but this is the only data that we actually have, and we don't know. Do we know the circumstances of the 7% reduction? For example, if they had extra police enforcement on those 6 roads, I think that alone would account for a reduction in speed, irrespective of the speed limit. So, is there any other data out there at all that we're aware of that would indicate this will actually work?
Through the chair to the councillor, we don't have that detail in terms of Edmonton's experience, but we can look into that and report back. In terms of the Ontario context, no, we don't have any information or available data. We are waiting for Ottawa to report back on their experience with the neighborhood area speed reductions, and that will help us inform our recommendations for when we come back to council in 2020.
Okay, I think that definitely supports the pilot idea in the short term at least, so we get better data. Last question, Madam Chair. Not that I've really fully thought this through or not, but part of the issue I think is going back to the enforcement. And I recall that, and I stand to be corrected, but are municipalities not able to begin implementing systems like photo radar at the municipal level?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes. The automated speed enforcement can be installed in school zones and community safety zones. That said, the region of Waterloo in its entirety, and for that matter, a number of municipalities in the province are working collaboratively to determine how best to roll that program out. In the region of Waterloo in particular, the region of Waterloo is heading that up on behalf of all the municipalities and townships. A rollout is expected in early 2020, and it will target school zones.
Okay, I'm going to think on that between now and next week. Thank you.
Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Chair Galloway-Seelock, and thank you, Councillor Davey, for that question about the speed control cameras, because I really do think that enforcement is part of this, a big part of it, have that ability. I've appreciated the hard work that the staff have done at the traffic calming meetings that I've attended, and we're trying to deal with a lot of the issues that come up at these meetings. It's really important that this gets done. Now, I know there's been some talk about maybe expanding this citywide. My concern is paying for that. What do we have budgeted if it were to go citywide? Where would the money come from to pay for it starting this year?
Mr. Reedman?
Through the chair, so we do not have budget for a full rollout across the city. The funding that would be allocated to this is coming from the traffic calming program for the pilot. So should council direct staff to roll out across the city, it would have to be referred to the budget process and considered in consultation with all of the other priorities that council has in front of them.
And just to reiterify one more time, you're confident that the information that we'll get from the pilot will give us some good information to base our decisions on to take this citywide?
Through the chair to the councillor, yeah, we're excited about the data that we're going to get back, both the qualitative and the quantitative. We're testing these pilots in 3 different neighborhoods. They vary in size, they vary in terms of the urban fabric. Area 64, for example, was built in the 1980s. It's more mature, it has larger lots, whereas areas 2 and 3 are newer with less tree coverage and more driveways. So we're excited from the quantitative front, but also the qualitative and understanding how the community feels about it. And this whole education piece, again, ties back to the updates in our development manual and our complete street strategy that will be coming forward later this year, and tying the 40 kilometer an hour speed limit as one tool, tying it to a broader strategy and direction that the city is trending in.
Okay, thank you so much. And I would just really hope that you can push for the region to let us roll out speed control cameras. As we've heard at all the traffic calming meetings, your number one challenge is changing driver behavior. And I strongly feel that that is one of the ways that we'll be able to achieve that. Thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis?
Sorry, you must have pressed it by accident.
Okay, that's all first round. So I have just a couple of questions, and then we'll go to second round questions. I guess just generally, I want to understand, other than the complaints that were put in per ward, how was the specific neighborhoods selected to be part of the pilot project?
To the chair, the number of complaints was our starting point, and obviously wards 2, 4, and 5 generated the most since 2018. From there, we wanted to also make sure we were including school zones as well as community destinations. Between the three, we have 4 school zones, as well as 98 community destinations, which include trails, open space, parks. I'd mentioned previously we're testing areas of different size. So having the gateway signage and that entry point closer to a destination that you're trying to get to, does that differ from a larger area where you're driving past the gateway point and then have a much longer distance to get to your destination? Does that additional driving then transition to higher speeds? And then finally, we wanted to test out areas with suburban areas that have different urban environments, trees, driveways, lot size. So those were we tried to make our selection as quantitative as possible given the data that we have access to.
Well, I have a little bit of data here to share with you as well. On the Huron Village Facebook page last night, I put a poll on to see who wanted to participate, who didn't want to participate, and who was indifferent. And the live poll results right now are 88 people are in favor, 34 people are not in favor, and 13 people are indifferent. So it's something definitely that the community wants to be a part of. But having said that, another person put on another poll that said, what do you believe is the problem with regards to the most accidents? And people very overwhelmingly said distracted driving is the number one cause of accidents. So how are we going to, does going to 40 kilometers an hour help distracted driving, or what can we do to help distracted drivers?
To the chair, I think if a catastrophic event happens when someone's driving 40 kilometers an hour versus 50 because they were distracted, the potential impact to a pedestrian is much less. So slowing drivers down, even if they are distracted, has benefits. Everything that we're doing in transportation, whether it be our formal, seasonal, or resident-led traffic calming, complete streets, the 40K review, our road diets through new bike lanes. I think this is all bringing awareness that we're trying to create a safer environment for all road users, whether it be drivers, pedestrians, or cyclists. And the communication campaigns and the education that we're rolling out are invaluable, and we're working closely with communications to continue to bolster that.
Okay, thank you. That's all of my questions. I have 3 more people in the queue. Are those additional questions or comments? Okay, Mayor Verbanovich, here's our questions. And Councillor Zola, questions? Okay, Mayor Verbanovich.
Thanks, and I'll save my comment till after that, but 2 quick follow-up questions. Is there a mechanism, because you're saying we need to be sort of the exception in terms of putting the signage onto residential streets. Is there a mechanism where, in fact, we say that we're a 40-kilometer-an-hour community, and the exception becomes the regional arterial and the regional roads and the arterial roads, and they need to be signed?
Through the chair to the mayor, no, we can't sign it that way. We have to designate neighborhood areas as per the Highway Traffic Act.
So the Highway Traffic Act is what says it has to be 50?
No, it gives us the ability to sign neighborhood areas less than 50, but we can't sign the entire city because we have to sign the entry and exit points to whatever area that we're designating.
Right, so that's my point, is can we not sign the entrance points into the city as a 40-kilometer-an-hour city, and then have those arterials simply be signed as something different?
Mr. Cronkite?
Through you, Madam Chair, based on our interpretation of the Highway Traffic Act, we just simply can't do that. It really outlines that you must designate neighborhood areas, and neighborhood areas, based on any of the information that we could collect, is defined by arterial roads. So the arterial roads define the neighborhood area, which means that we have to sign it the way that we're proposing. If we were to, if the region were to move in a direction where arterial roads were also to be considered at 40 kilometers an hour, then I think the case could be made. But based on the interpretation of the HTA and all the information that we could collect, we simply can't go in that direction.
Okay, so maybe as part of this pilot, we can actually dig a little bit deeper on that, because I think that in itself would help us as part of the longer term strategy. You know, and even if regional roads don't go that way, I think that would be encouraging. And in terms of the cost of the signage, really what we're dealing with here is not simply replacing the number where we could presumably put a sticker on. It's because we have all these new signs to put up now, correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Eamon, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, through the chair, I think I can clarify a little bit further. So I believe our interpretation is correct based on the implementation in Ottawa and Hamilton as well. Their rollouts are similar, that they're signing at the neighborhood or street level, which is a significant cost for those communities. Something that we could talk to the province about is if there's any appetite to change that while we're going through our pilot, so when we report back at the end of our pilot to see if there's any advancement on that front.
Yeah, because I mean, presumably if this is an issue in our neighborhoods, it's an issue in neighborhoods, quite frankly, in every other city. And I know that same approach is, for example, I mean, you mentioned Ottawa and Hamilton. It certainly exists in Toronto. Now, the one thing that is different in Toronto, in many of the residential streets, is they use stop signs as well. And I know that's not an approach that we've taken, and I know the rationale and justification. How do they get around it? Or do they just ignore the provincial rules or guidelines?
Through the chair to the mayor, there could be a few reasons. Those signs could be grandfathered in and had been there for many, many years because of their older neighborhoods. And then removing all-way stops is a process in itself. Toronto likely has higher traffic in some neighborhoods than we do, so they generate the warrants needed in order to install an all-way stop. Nonetheless, in order to install a new one, we need to meet the warrants in the OTM. And if we don't, then we have to have really good justification why we would install a stop sign somewhere that doesn't warrant it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned, as far as educating people, that you would target the residents in the pilot areas. Does that suggest that the only people that speed in those areas live in those areas, or if we're talking education, and if the idea is, well, I still think we should go, as Ms. Bowman said, I think we need to be more aggressive on this and be a bit bolder. But even when we talk about education, first of all, what does that mean, and why such a small target area?
Through the chair to the councillor, we will definitely go broader and educate and communicate with the whole city about what we're trying to achieve here and why, and the safety benefits of a 40-kilometer posted speed limit. the individual neighborhood areas that we've identified, what we find whenever we do our traffic calming projects, for example, is that the people speeding, at least most of them, live within the neighborhoods. The neighborhoods that we're looking at, a lot of the roads are crescents and streets that you're only going to use to get to and from your house. There are some streets and there is some cut-through traffic, but we really want to understand if a really strong communication and education campaign showing people why we're doing this, the benefits, trying to change driver culture. If we can do that at that smaller scale neighborhood, then it's likely a model that we can roll out citywide if it's successful.
And what do we mean by driver culture?
So someone had made the comment earlier about working with driving schools to try and teach people at a young age that speeding can have catastrophic results. And I think when we're speaking with people in the community, I don't think people, when they're speeding, they intend to cause a safe environment, an unsafe environment, or cause their neighbors to feel unsafe. But they get in tunnel vision. The streets are often designed to be more conducive to higher speeds. And we want to just bring more awareness to that. And that ties well to our neighborhood or resident-led traffic calming, where we're not actually physically changing the road, but through different community events such as painting a crosswalk and having kids out there painting the crosswalk. It helps show parents and help bring awareness and visibility to traffic safety issues. And we want to try and generate some of that similar buzz through the education we'll roll out in the pilot areas.
Okay, one last question, and I know I'm provoking a bit here, but how would you describe driving culture now?
Through the chair to the councillor, I think it differs from neighborhood to neighborhood.
Through the chair, to basically put a definition of driving culture in Kitchener is very difficult, and not one that I think that staff can really do. But what we can say is that people drive at the speed that they're comfortable at. So when you're looking at driving culture, you drive based on your comfort level, and part of this pilot and part of the education campaign is to change that comfort level. So if we can change that comfort level, make it something different, we can slow people down. But really, that's the focus here.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, this question may have been asked before, but it deals with enforcement. I really believe enforcement is the best way to deal with all of this. Is it possible for enforcement to be delegated, that is, rather than having the police authorities do it, that a municipality could have their own enforcement staff? Is that allowed under provincial law?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, it is not.
So that's, has it ever been considered?
We can approach the province with that, but my understanding is that anything that's in the Highway Traffic Act must be enforced by a police officer.
Is it worth investigating?
Mr. Eidman?
Through the chair, so if it were, it would come with significant staffing costs associated with that, which I don't think they would be open to it to begin with. There is the tool that is being provided, which is the speed cameras, which is a new mechanism which does help with some of the enforcement problem, which I think is a reasonable next step to move forward with.
Thank you.
Councillor Davey?
Thank you. Just a couple quick things, hopefully. I think the question was asked, but I'm not sure what the response or what the intention is. I want to make sure this is as scientific a process as possible, and one of the concerns I have is whether there will be a request for police monitoring or not. And I think it's a terrible idea, as mentioned before, because we can't implement any measures that we can't guarantee we can implement going forward in the future. So, direct question to staff, is there going to be a request for additional police monitoring of this area or not?
Through you, Madam Chair, our intent is to have a request, but it's to request one specific area so that we can then quantify how impactful the request for additional enforcement is. So we will have two specific areas where we're going to request that they don't do any additional enforcement, so that that's kind of base case. And then in the third neighborhood where we've hopefully had increased enforcement, we can quantifiably understand what increased enforcement will do for us.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's fine as long as there's a control. The only other question I had is I'm a little bit worried too with respect to the flexi poles. I've heard from residents, and I don't know if this is true or not, that they have limited effectiveness in terms of timing. So part of my concern is if we launch this campaign and then we immediately start monitoring traffic, and then for a very short term right after we implement these measures, that might skew the data as well. So I was looking at the timelines and I don't see any indication of monitoring the speeds, say, in the spring after they've been up for 5 or 6 months. Is that something staff intends to do?
Through the chair to the councillor, correct. The timing for us for data, after data or post data collection, is the spring of 2020.
So it will be in place for quite a while before we actually start measuring, or I guess we can do both, but as long as it's broken up.
Yes, absolutely. We can't collect data over the winter months with our current equipment. The ADR tubes that go across the roadway, they don't function with the plows. So we need to wait for the spring regardless.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Councillor Singh?
Yeah, thankfully, Councillor Davies' last few questions answered my questions. And so the AVR tubes is a primary way of measuring the speed on the roadway. So it's just more of a question or comment, rather than relying too heavily or even requesting for enforcement in the pilot project areas. Would that skew the data in a way? Because typically we can't have enforcement on every street, and simply having the signage and having the I guess the technology to be able to measure what the speeds are on that roadway, that would give us a clear outline of if people are following the signs and the intended purpose is being met.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's exactly why we want to focus any additional and increased enforcement into one zone, so that way there are a minimum of 2 zones that are basically the base case. We can fully understand what the pilot has done, and we'll have an understanding as well of what increased enforcement can do.
Okay, and the speed measurements will start spring, so after all the snow is gone. So the roadways are clear and typical speeds that people usually travel on.
That's correct.
Okay. Again, I appreciate that we're going to have that measured approach for the enforcement, but I just want to say I don't think we really have to give a clear route to people and just observe how they behave. I think that's the best way of having this pilot project. Anyway, sorry, I'll key out and then I'll key back in for comments. My apologies.
It's okay. Councillor Ioannidis? Councillor Michaud, question, comments? No one else has a question? Okay, good. Before we go into comments, I want to just remind everyone that this meeting is supposed to end in 10 minutes, and we still have 2 other items that we have to deal with, and we have delegations for the next item, 2 of which have small children who are behaving very, very, very well. So I just ask you to keep that in mind as we go through comments. Mayor Urbanovic, did you want to go first? Because I understand there's some wording change that you would like.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and a lot of good questions, I think, in discussion so far on this issue. I'm going to move the recommendation with just a minor wording change, and it's that the proposed neighborhood speed limit review pilot project be approved as phase 1 of an initiative to create safer, slower streets, and as outlined in report DSD-19-159. And I do that because I think there's 2 key messages we need to get out today. One is that we want to proceed with a pilot project with respect to the initiative of the neighborhood speed limit review. And the second one being that we also want to signal that while there may not we may not continue with this. I believe, in fact, we will. But while we may not continue with this, there's other work that will need to be done, and it's important to indicate that this is phase one of initiative to create safer, slower streets. And in fact, I think one of the things that over the next year that we should look at, should that broader initiative, in fact, be something such as taking the initiative of us as a city, or together with our other 7 municipalities in the region, look at becoming a Vision Zero community, which looks at zero fatalities or serious injuries in terms of traffic vehicle accidents, because we haven't made that commitment as a community, and I think that in itself would be part of an education campaign going forward. And it would take a lot more work to look at what are the implications of that, costs, and so on going forward. I want to thank the delegation for coming forward today with respect to the suggestion that this be implemented in its entirety right away. I do think that it is important that we look at something like this from a pilot perspective. While I do think broader means and activities are necessary, I think we need to figure out, is this the right, are these the right steps? Do we need to make some changes before we sort of approve a wholesale plan that involves a $500,000 expenditure? I think this is the prudent, more responsible way of doing it. I do think that speed reduction will obviously be the primary measurement, but I also think we need to look at stats, primarily in my mind, are there less fatalities and injuries in the community? And I know it'll be hard to weigh that when we're only doing these 3 areas, but also, do the people in these neighborhoods feel safer going forward? Because that has some value, and I know that's harder to quantify and measure, which we all like, but I think it is something we need to somehow factor in and consider as part of this. I know the comment was made in terms of, how does all this link into climate action and our commitment in that regard. Part of the reality is, yes, we want to encourage more people to walk, cycle, and so on where possible. Some will argue that, and I've read some of the research on this, slowing things down actually isn't necessarily good for the environment, but the reality is that what actually impacts things is not slowing down as much as starting and stopping. And in fact, those are the worst things for impacting GHGs. And when you slow traffic down, traffic is more likely to move continually and therefore not start and stop as much, which is actually a positive in terms of some of the written work that's been done in this area. So in my mind, while I would like to see us move forward quickly, I think slow and steady sometimes is the more prudent approach, and so I'm pleased that staff have suggested that direction on this one. And I would just finally add, and I like, partially I like where Councillor Gazzola was going in terms of, are there other ways of looking at enforcement? I think one of the bigger challenges, quite frankly, of using non-police personnel, just as a sideline, is that often there's other offenses such as weapons and drugs and other things that actually end up getting found during a traffic stop, and that's the reason even if it was allowed, we probably wouldn't want to get into that other stuff, because sadly it's, that's becoming increasingly more dangerous. So that is the recommendation that I'm moving, and hopefully we can move forward with this and see it come forward in the coming year, including additional dialogue with the region and with the province to see if we can change the tone so that in fact we could potentially become a 40-kilometer-an-hour city, and then look at regional roads as the exception.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Galloway Seelock. I've been rather quiet on this subject. Overall, I'm supportive of the recommendation and the slight changes by Mayor Vrbanovic and most of his comments as well. I agree with. I think the challenge is, and this is the challenge that we deal with, and it comes down to driver behavior, and human behavior. And I mean, this is just going to be one tool, I think, that will add to their other tools, because this is not the magic bullet that's going to solve all our issues. And I'm not prepared to just yet to support a full-fledged citywide without actually hearing from the residents that are affected by this initially and get their feedback as well, and as well to get a better sense of what the cost will be and all that stuff, because there's other initiatives that we are competing with that deserve some more attention as well. And so I'd rather get a more holistic report back that will give me a better opinion on where we should go with this.
Councillor Singh?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think I've made some comments through my questions already, so I'll be brief. I agree with earlier comments that this does need to be a slow and steady and measured approach. I think we do it to our residents to give confidence that we gave the necessary thought and time and collect data to move in a direction that will be drastically different than the way we have done things in the past. And I think our residents deserve that, to have that research in hand to show that this is the right course to go. Although on paper it looks like a great idea, and I agree, but sometimes it doesn't always necessarily work that way in the real world. At the end of the day, if we had people always follow the rules and the guidelines at the 50 kilometers an hour, I don't think this issue would be at this table. I think, unfortunately, people at times are less mindful, and signages don't always provide the desired result. So as Councillor Ioannidis has said, I think this will be just one extra measure to help enforce and help reduce the speed limits and make our streets safer for our children and pedestrians and cyclists. But I think the data will show what the results are, and we have to continue to work with the province as well as our neighboring municipalities to show, to at least draw this out as a collective rather than doing it on a one-off. I don't think residents that drive between Kitchener, Waterloo, even Cambridge, see much of a difference in which part of the area they're at. They see it as a unified community. So I think it needs to be consistent, and we can't just do it as a standalone. And I'm hoping that one-year pilot project will give enough time for our neighboring communities to come hopefully with the same conclusion and take benefit from the data that we collected. And furthermore, as others have said, we really need to strive and focus on new technologies that make it easier for us to enforce, and as a way that people can't just get away with driving unsafe on our streets. And I think having a patrol car at every roadway is not feasible. It's not financially viable. But having cameras definitely can provide that benefit, and we need to continue working with the region as well as the province to have that allowance, to have that ability, so that we can achieve our desired goal.
Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to thank Councillor Ioannidis for using the word behavior, because I think if we can actually change culture of any sort is a bit utopian, because culture is not one thing, and to change culture could take centuries. So I think to change drivers' behavior is a better way to describe the intent behind this pilot project. And also communication versus education. I think communication is an important component of it. Education, I'm not quite sure what that means in this context. But beyond that, I just want to say, to me this is an opportunity to show Waterloo that we do have leadership in the region. If Waterloo is taking this to its council in the winter, in the fall and the winter, if we take this action now citywide, I think it would give them, incentive to do the same thing in Waterloo. If we stick with the pilot project at this stage, then it leaves them in a similar predicament, because they'll say, well, Kitchener didn't do it, so we can't do it. So the timing factor here gives us an edge, I think, to be innovative and take that step. I agree there are a combination of measures that can reduce speed, and these have been mentioned, traffic calming measures of different sorts, enhanced enforcement, and I don't think those things have to change. Because I don't think by whether you do a pilot project or citywide, reducing the speed to 40 kilometers an hour is not going to solve the problem, but it might make some of us reflect as we're driving 70 kilometers down Westmount. And it might make us reflect and say, whoa, I better slow down. So it's not going to solve the problem on its own, as I don't think any of these measures we can see don't. But I think there's plenty of research that's being done to the fact that cities are making these changes. There's plenty of evidence out there and research that's been done that I don't think we need to be hesitant, and I don't think we need to shy away from being more proactive with this proposal, which I think is great. I think reducing the speed to 40 kilometers an hour, we've all said, we've heard over and over again from residents their concerns with speeding across the board. So I encourage people to try and think in those terms. Thank you.
Councillor Marsh? I'm happy with the direction that we're going right now, specifically to consider this pilot project as a first phase of a citywide initiative. I think that's the intent here in the mayor's wording. It doesn't say citywide, but I think that's where we're going. And I also agree that we should be looking towards using the technology that we're allowed to use. If we're waiting for the region to roll it out, I hope that we can push towards earlier implementation than later, because I think here at the City of Kitchener, we want to be leaders, and we want to not just wait for others and have to follow in their footsteps. Also, I'd like to ask staff, when they are working with the region on implementation of speed cameras, that we not just do it for those singular streets alongside city or schools. If we have to create a community safety zone near schools, then to Councillor Johnston's point, it's got to be a few streets surrounding a school area, not just one street that happens to be alongside a school, because we know that the issue is a little bit broader. I'm really looking forward to seeing those implemented ASAP. So let's find a way to push for that.
Councillor Davey?
I think I'll be supporting this as well. I was actually, I would agree with Councillor Chapman in terms of the education versus communication piece. I think we need to do the communication piece, certainly that this is the new reality, but in terms of the education piece, I think, to be frank, I think people know that they're speeding and it's a risk reward thing, and I'm not sure that education is going to change too many behaviors. On that, I'm going to leave it for now, but I do think technology is going to be the long-term solution, and it can go lockstep with this, the path forward. I think speed cameras are indeed the way to go, not in a punitive cash grab way that it was done in the past, but in a notification way, and it can be a lot lower cost. I think once our Internet of Things streetlight network is up and running, I think that's a perfect little communication tool where you have the camera maybe on a streetlight in a school zone that works very much like the 407, where humans barely touch it. You get caught going too fast. We send you it goes back, it gets sent back to a network, letters printed off, you get a message in the mail saying, hey, you were speeding, don't be a jerk. Maybe you get 4 or 5 or 6 warnings before we start doing anything in terms of cost recovery, but I think that's the future, and I think that's the way that we're going to have to go.
Councillor Gazzola?
Yes. I've knocked on enough doors in the last 20 years in several campaigns that I'm fully aware that speeding and traffic is a concern that affects everyone. I've attended enough traffic calming meetings. I do try to remind everyone that most of the problems come from their neighbors. They're not people passing through. It's their own neighbors are the ones that are causing the problems. And with that, we all speed, and I am part of we. We all go too fast because we run into problems. And then I know coming to work this morning, coming to the City Hall, I went all the way down several streets and came to all of a sudden a sign that says Queen Street's closed. All of a sudden I have to turn around and get to where I'm going, and one of your first reactions are to speed up to make up the time that you have to go to your way. So that's human nature, and it's something that we have to deal with. And I'm not sure. I really believe in enforcement is the best thing. I think you get the best results. I do not support doing a full city review at this time. In the fullness of time, that may be where we need to go, but we need to get data. We need to get a lot of information. We need to walk before we run. Having said that, I will support the pilot that's in front of us. I think it's the way to do things. It's the way to be able to study things and to be able to come to some conclusions without spending considerable amounts of money. But in so doing, we have to really nail down the data that we are getting. We have to assess what are the conditions today, what are the speeds today, and we have to have the data to show that so that we can compare it with new data once we make changes. So I really caution staff that we do have to have a lot of good data before we go the next step.
Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Chair Galloway Seelock. I want to thank staff for an excellent report. I have been involved in quite a few traffic calming meetings with staff. I can tell you their knowledge, their expertise, their authentic compassion for changing driver behavior is off the charts. It's wonderful. They do an awesome job. I'm in full support of this pilot project. I'm also in support of the additional words that the mayor has brought forward. I'm not in favor of going citywide at this point. I think this pilot is both financially responsible and statistically reliable, so I'm going to support that. Thank you.
All right, I'll make my final comments. As this issue was coming forward, I wasn't sure that I'd support 40 kilometers going citywide, and I'm still not sure that I will, but I am supportive of this pilot project. I think within the 12 hours that I had this poll on Facebook, I was able to get almost 150 people to respond, and more than half of them agree that we should at least try it. So I think it's something we need to look at, but it will be all about the data and the feedback from the residents that'll help make my decision when this comes back. I think I agree with technology changing daily, that there may be a better opportunities down the road, but I think this is the right direction to go at this time. And I too just want to thank staff for all your hard work on this project. It's never easy to bring something like this forward and try and make significant change. And so I like your stepped approach or phased approach in looking at this. So I thank you for your report. With that, it's been moved by Mayor Verbanovich. All in favor? We sure can. It's the motion that's what we're voting on. It's fairly simple. It doesn't really change anything from the original recommendation. It just shows that it's phase 1, which really that's what it is. So we're voting on this. It's on the screen. Those in favor? And opposed? That carries. Again, thank you to staff for all your hard work on this. All right, we are going to move forward to the bicycling facilities on Yonge Street and Duke Street. Mr. Croft is here to answer questions, but we will dive right into the delegations. And again, thank you for your patience. The first delegation is Matthew Rodriguez from the Cycling and Trails Advisory Committee. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This has been a very exciting week for cycling projects here in the city of Kitchener, as I'm sure you're all aware. So I'll keep this brief, but I did just kind of want to highlight the importance of this project within the broader scheme of things. We're already on slide 2 here. So just by way of some background, there we go. By way of some background, staff presented the preliminary design for this project at the April 2019 Cycling and Trails Advisory Committee meeting. Overall, there was broad support for the Duke Street design and the configuration of Duke Street to add the contra bike lane. There was some fulsome discussion around the design of the Yonge Street bike lane, which originally had showed a two-way route in addition to a travel lane, which committee felt could cause some confusion for users, both cyclists and drivers. And following that discussion, committee passed a motion to ask staff to revisit that design of Yonge Street in advance of the open house. So what you're seeing today does reflect generally what was discussed at the Cycling and Trails Committee. Just to kind of recap, the committee is supportive of the project as a whole and the revised designs that you're seeing today. And I just want to highlight, I know someone else is here to speak more to the Duke Street connection, but just the importance of this Yonge Street connection. So I use this corridor every day to get to work. Going to work, it's easy, you go with traffic. You know, you go along Yonge over to Margaret and away I go. But coming back home, you're faced with either riding along the sidewalk, going against the flow of traffic, going all the way down to Queen Street, or taking Victoria. There really isn't a safe crossing of Weaver Street on that side of downtown. So this is a really, really important project. And it'll help people get to the Spurline Trail. There's a number of people that take Margaret over the bridge and over Bright Up and to the trail. So I think this is an absolutely vital connection that is in the current master plan. Diverting around Hibner Park would add 2 additional conflict points between bikes and cars, where people on bikes are required to stop and turn. And most people on bikes would continue to ignore that less direct route and would still take that stretch of Yonge from Maynard. So while it might formally be that way, I know I would personally continue straight on that stretch instead of making 2 turns into downtown. And the design that we're seeing today also offers a couple opportunities for future improvements of the alignment, including, this can come through the ongoing master plan, but, possibly protecting the bike lanes on Yonge Street, or reconfiguring that stop sign at Aaron's and Yonge Street to provide, at the bottom of a hill, allow cyclists to actually use that momentum to get to the top without having to stop at Aaron's. But I know there'd be some technical analysis that would be required into determining the viability of that. And just in this, for the sake of time, as I said, the Duke Street, is a critical route alternative to Weber and King, and again, prioritizes cyclists. And I just want to emphasize that, as Melissa said in her presentation, this also aligns with the climate emergency that Council did declare. And I think that this should be something that is considered in all decisions, possibly as a section of a staff report, how we're addressing that emergency. Again, thank you to the committee administrators and staff for working with the committee on this. Quite an exciting project, and a quick win that will bring good results for folks on bikes, car drivers, and the residents of both neighborhoods that this impacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Councillor Marsh, did question of the delegation? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a second delegation, Annie Doran. And again, your children are behaving magnificently. If I had my boys here, they'd be running every which direction.
I've had to bribe them.
That works, whatever works.
There was ice cream coming.
Oh, nice, nice.
I am just here to emphatically speak in favor of the contraflow lane on Duke Street and the changes happening on Yonge. We actually moved we're at the corner of Duke and Cameron, and we moved to that location in like 2005 without a car, and specifically because of its easy access to downtown and its easy access to transportation and everything. And there's a lot of other people in the neighborhood who actually don't drive and use cycling as their main form of transportation. We all cycle the wrong way down that street anyways, because King Street and Weber Street are just so much more dangerous. So having the contraflow lane in is a really small way of saying, you know what, we actually do value the safety of our cyclists, and promote the continuing to choose cycling over driving your car to downtown. And also, I'm looking forward to the fact that it gives a proper lane where we get to bring our children into the lane, rather than, having, like, if I've got the trailer with one kid, I'm on the road, and then I have a kid up on the sidewalk on their bike, and it becomes pretty hard to actually, navigate stops and all that when everyone's split up. And so it's nice to be able to have a definitive, you can bring them down, then you can teach them about the rules of the street as well, and how they can be responsible cyclists. And hopefully that's something that will continue to play out through as this generation grows up, and we'll get more, the city continues to build great cycling infrastructure, then hopefully we'll get more cyclists actually, not going on all the sidewalks with all the pedestrians and small children, and actually using the roads and the lanes that they're supposed to. It's hard to do that when it's doesn't feel as safe. So yeah, that was basically what we wanted to say. We're really, we're looking forward to having this change. It's working with it works really well with the traffic the murals and traffic calming stuff that we're already working on in the neighborhood. I think that's pretty much it. Short, sweet. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
for coming in. We appreciate it. Did someone have a question? Do you have a question of the delegation? Okay. Thank you very much. All right, questions of staff. We'll start with Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. And at the appropriate time, I'd like to move this recommendation. I didn't have questions of the delegations, but wanted to echo your thank you for being so darn patient. I know that taking time out of your day to sit in those chairs is not the most pleasant experience always, but thank you. Question of staff, I saw that the plan on Yonge Street is to have the Sharrows and I'm just and on Duke Street too, I believe. I'm just wondering if you can explain, even though we know that Sharrows aren't the most effective tool, can you tell us about share the road signs? Are we going to be implementing those simultaneously with the Sharrows?
Through the chair, we will have we'll have some signage that says bike route on it as well. We're really seeing Sharrows as a wayfinding tool, not a form of infrastructure.
Okay.
And it's particularly useful as a wayfinding tool on streets that are very low volume and low speeds, which both Duke and Yonge qualify as. Okay, terrific. Thank you. That's all.
Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, regarding these triggers, bicycle trigger things, detector triggers, I've heard complaints from people in the cycling community that they don't always work effectively. Is this going to be newer technology, or can we be confident that it will serve the purpose they're designed to do?
Through the chair, so it will be up to the region to implement these. What we've asked is that they have very clear space for waiting, so we'll work with them to demonstrate through pavement markings and signage where the cyclist is supposed to position. That's generally where the issues come, is that it's not clear where to get the sensor trigger. The other piece that we've asked them to investigate, which they are, is some sort of light that would light up when you have triggered it. So it would tell you that you have triggered it, and now you know you just need to wait for the cycle to come through. So that's something that they're investigating.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Davey?
Thank you. I noticed in the financial implications we're removing some parking meters, but it didn't indicate what the revenue loss of that would be, and also I'm curious the number of parking spots that will be removed.
Through the chair, there are 5 paid parking meters between Weber and Aaron's. They yield approximately $46 per week.
46 per week. Okay, I'll just comment quickly that social media recently have heard incorrectly that we've been adding parking, which clearly is not the case. Whenever we reduce parking for cycling, I think we should make a note of it so that the message is clear of the direction that we're going.
Good. All right, there is no further questions. Did anyone want to make comments? No? Okay, then all in favor. Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. And our last report is the 2019 gas pipeline projects. Moved by Councillor Davey. Is there any questions? Councillor Gazzola?
Get a little more information. This is quite a budget variance. Were we aware of this at the time when we were dealing with the budget just a few months ago?
Through the chair, no, we're not. How we do our budgeting for the gas pipeline projects is we meet with the region and city projects, and we look at all the projects coming up in the next calendar year. And then when they start doing their design, it's at that time they may or may not know they have to relocate the gas main. And typically relocating the gas main is cheaper for them instead of relocating like a storm or something like that based on the infrastructure. So what happens is they come to us and request these projects be moved and that we relocate the main.
How much of this 2.1 million is due to the region and other road authorities?
Through the chair, I don't have that exact breakdown, but as the pie chart indicates there, the road authority is the red portion there, so I don't know if that's 20% or something to that effect. And the green is the end of useful life, but the majority of it is customer driven, which most of that is unrecoverable, and that's due to development where the developer will come in, or if they have a subdivision and that they'll need servicing, so that in order to facilitate development we have to go in there and install gas mains and services so they can build houses and we can provide natural gas to them.
And my last question is, what is the impact of moving all these monies out of that capital reserve fund? Are we going to be short down the road on something else?
So as you can see in the financial implications there, the balance is going to leave about $400,000. So through the budget process, we're going to have to figure out how to bring that up in the next few years to the minimum levels, which are, I think, trying to remember what it is. I think it's around 5 million or something like that. Is the million?
Were there any other sources of funding?
Through the chair, the issue with the gas pipeline project is that when we work on a project or requested to move a project, that we may or may not get 50% funding under the Act on this, and it depends. There's a funding formula. And so that even if they are making us relocate something, we may have to do it at 100% our cost, depending on the age of that or the funding agreement. Or sometimes we may get only 50% funding back for their request.
Thank you.
Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, this may be a dumb question, but what would the consequences be of putting this off until the next budget cycle?
Through the chair, as you can see, there's the new services. So if we were to stop that, then we wouldn't be able to provide any services in new houses. So you delay development or contract being able to sell houses in areas where we wouldn't be able to provide any gas. Or for one project, we're upgrading a station, one of our gas stations. We have 3 large gas stations, regulator stations. So one project alone for that is $700,000 that we're working on. So that would limit the capacity of that station, which could impact delivering the ability to deliver natural gas to customers in the winter. So we've already reviewed the list and prioritized which project we can move out in that. And so this is the really the bare bones list that we figure that we have to do this year in order to properly provide natural gas to customers this winter.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions, it's been moved by Councillor Davey. Any comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. With that, we are done Community Infrastructure Services, and we go right into Special Counsel, Mayor Verbanovich.
Thank you very much. I will call the Special Council meeting to order and turn to you to bring in item number 1.
I will bring in the recommendation from Community Infrastructure Services. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Dave Schneider that the provincially significant employment zones be considered for consideration, including the one we added during the committee meeting.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Move that we go in camera for the items listed less the one that was noted as taken off by the email from Ms. McDonald on Friday evening. Moved by Councillor Schneider, second by Councillor Ioannidis. All those in... Sorry? Councillor Gazzola?
I just have a theoretical question.
Theoretical? Go ahead.
One of the topics we're dealing with involves 2 public bodies. It's not public and private sector. I just wonder, when it's 2 public bodies, why it has to be in caucus.
Turn to staff to...
I know they're going to tell me it's land, but it's when we're dealing with...
I can't see who's there. Mr. Chair. Oh, sorry, Ms. McDonald.
I can try and answer that. It doesn't matter if it's 2 public bodies, it's the essence of what the conversation's about, and I believe in this case it's about land acquisition and disposition.
Okay, so all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And because the item that was taken off is the one that we would have had to come back for, bylaws for 3 readings. Councillor Marsh, Councillor Davey, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Schneider, Councillor Singh, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.